Hello, it's Sunday morning, and welcome to Media Studies. I'm James Brown. He's Saby Reyes-Kulkarni. How you doing, Saby?
I am doing very well. Thank you, James. This is a real pleasure to be able to do this. It's we setting up all the stuff and there's a little bit of stress, but when I think about uh, what we're talking about, I'm just like, this is nice. Hopefully it'll be that way for the audience too.
Well, I mean, it's not a topic I would have picked, but that's the interesting part of it because I think it's a topic that I'd be interested in discussing.
That's why I've been wanting to ask you about this for months at this point.
You want to get right to it, or you want to wait a bit?
I think getting right to it is okay unless you had something else on your
No,
mind.
let's get right to it. I'm sure there'll be things that come up. They typically do.
So a few months ago, I got a text from a good friend of mine. Shout out to my friend Ed Gabersky, aka Eddie Nebula, who's a local Rochester musician I've known for over 25 years at this point. One of those people you meet where like the first word he ever said to me, I felt completely at ease and like an affinity for this guy. But he sent me a text, and I'll read you some of it, and it aligns very much with some thoughts that I've had and that I've been wanting to get your take on. So he says, he's white, by the way. He says, I'm prejudiced against white people who go overboard and try to sound like a black soul singer. That isn't the same as suggesting that you can't have elements of soul or even perform soul music or R&B music if you're white. But you got to know your place. Color inside the lines, and he means musically there. I say this because there's an element of soulfulness that is only found authentically in the voice of a black soul singer, female or male, and it's informed from very genuine places. For example, I like Humble Pie the band, but I like them as a rock band, not as a soul band. I think they make for a great 70s rock band, and I like their songs. He goes on, but there's this is my favorite part. Listening to Steve Marriott from Humble Pie go overboard to be black is like watching Tropic Thunder with Robert Downey Jr. playing a white guy playing a black guy, even though I love that film.
Go on.
So then he says, now black people have a wide open road to play white-based rock and roll anytime they want because it's their fucking music in the first place. Now, this is not a super woke dude either. It sounds it has that ring, doesn't it? As somebody who's like playing it really not safe, but saying the things. And that got me thinking because I know guitar players like Vernon Reid and Tom Morello, Vernon Reid, Living Colour, Tom Morello, Rage Against the Machine, have like explicitly said before, this is our music. And they're talking about like rock and heavy rock in particular. And I feel like if you want to say rock and roll is black, that's fine. That's true. That's absolutely true. And even to some degree, roots music, like there's black roots in like country and all those other branches. But arena rock, the stuff I grew up listening to, I always felt was white. And should we have a hang up about that? So this is what I want to put. Yes, I want to put this in your lap, and I have much more to say. But I'm once you get out of the rock and roll era, once you get out of like, okay, Elvis co-opted or whatever, or got credit for things that black musicians like Little Richard weren't getting credit for. That's the story, right? That's the narrative. And I'm not disputing that. I don't know enough about that. It seems okay. I can accept that. Once you get into the 70s though, or even the late 60s into the 70s, I don't think we should have any reservation about saying this is a white American art form. And what's the problem? Why can't we embrace that? So you tell me, James, is that premise even correct? And is my question, what's your answer to my question?
So, is rock music white? My answer, It neither is nor is not. It's a
Mm.
weird question. It's it's like saying, is spaghetti American? Its origins? Not. Its iteration in this country? Is.
Is pizza American?
Its origins? Not. In this country? It is. Is Chinese food
Indian
American
food too.
Chinese food? Is
Indian
it
food too.
American Indian food?
Right. I mean, yeah, Indian food served in America. Yes, yes,
Served
yes,
in
yes.
America, like, because from what I understand, and you know this better than I, there's a bit of there's a different tweak for the
Oh, sure.
American taste.
Definitely, definitely. And there's a lot of regional, and Mexican food is very
That's another
regionally,
great example.
a lot of variation. Yeah.
All of these things neither are nor not. So when it comes to their origins, I mean, rock, you would think yes. I mean, from what we know, Robert Johnson going back, Devil selling soul at the crossroads, even going back into soul in, well, going back into the churches, really, and
Mhm.
and Sacred Steel. I was talking about pedal steel guitar with someone last week, and like there's this long lineage of rock being entangled with Black culture. Its origins are tied with Black culture. Is it solely? No, not solely, even in its origins. But it's an incredibly key part of its larger story. So I think there's an interesting question, and why I thought it got my brain going when you mentioned it was, okay, there's this larger discussion about cultural appropriation over the last, what, 10, 15? Is it longer than that?
In terms of its like percolating at the forefront, I'd say probably a dozen years, maybe a little more. But 2014 to me, 2012, 2014 to me seems right in there somewhere is this turning point where all of a sudden this starts to kind of flood popular discourse. These kinds of this
The
kind of
Jonathan Haidt year.
yeah, this kind of race hyper consciousness or hyper vigilance about race. At least as far as I saw it in my lane
Well,
of
more
music
than that,
journalism.
race, gender, I think culture. I think there's a mix of the Occupy Wall Street and what Jonathan Haidt repeatedly points to is sort of like where you had this generation of kids who are graduating around that era, who went into the workforces, who went into culture, and their expectations were something wholly different.
Yeah, they
That
became an HR nightmare and then they took over HR.
yeah, well, they wanted to nerf the world
Because the world had
because
been nerfed for them and they couldn't cope.
yeah,
This
well,
is Haidt's premise,
totally,
and they couldn't cope
totally.
with opposition and difference. They had been so coddled. Um, and ironically, Gen X parents, I don't think Haidt gets into this too much, or I don't know how much he gets into it, but I know I've observed this, and Megan Daum has brought this up. Gen Xers, my generation, who are like, man, we were left alone and drinking gin and getting high at 13, and my parents didn't know where I was, and I was a latchkey kid, and I'm proud of it. And that generation is like super helicopter parenty. So for whatever that's worth. But yeah, to what you were saying, that they wanted to nerf the world and demanded and succeeded in getting the workplace nerfed for
Without
them.
a doubt. And I think what we're seeing with national politics with the Trump administration is sort of a reaction to that, among other things. There's a reaction to a number of things, but I think that's a big undercurrent where it was like, okay, we're not nerfing anymore. At least not nerfing in the, well, that's probably let me rephrase that because I do think there is some nerfing, but it's like we're going to change the things we're going to nerf.
Or fuck you, I won't nerf what you tell me.
Well, yeah, I think, but to get to I fuck you. What you tell me?
You should have called this
Getting
episode that.
yeah, getting back to your larger point, I think um I think in practice, I mean, what post Hendrix? That's the reason why I picked Hendrix as a thumbnail. Um, what I mean, BB King, but BB King's more of a bluesman. I'm
Oh
trying to
yeah,
think of who would be like who would have picked up the baton after Hendrix. I
as being
mean,
the
Tracy
face of
Chapman in there somewhere.
not
I'm trying to think
really.
of. I mean,
She's
she was
folk. I mean,
more
she's dope, but
acoustic.
she's yeah. She's not. She's the next Joan Armatrading. She's not the next Jimi Hendrix. And listen, I love Joan Armatrading.
Yeah,
I think Tracy Chapman's super powerful. I'm just saying,
love them.
you're asking who's the face of the black face of rock music.
Yeah, and I think
Vernon Reid is the closest one, I would think.
yeah, Vernon Reid is certainly up there, and then after Vernon, because Vernon is, I mean, this is like a 30 years of Vernon, Living Color. For those who don't know,
It's
I
37
mean,
years. It's 1988 is that first record, the one that they had the big hit Cult of Personality on is 1988.
I mean, I mean, like just as a young kid, young black kid loving rock, growing up with Big Brother cranking up rock. When I heard like Seven Dust, I was pumped, but that's not the whole band. Like it's just they are rare. It's kind of like, I, actually, I hadn't thought about this till right now. The perfect analog is baseball.
I think I know where you're going with this. I'm excited.
You could argue the greatest baseball players of all time. A lot of people would look at Willie Mays.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, won't admit Barry Bonds, but Barry Bonds. You look at Ken Griffey Jr. growing up,
Mm-hmm.
Ken Griffey Sr. before him, Hank Aaron.
Mm-hmm.
The volume of black baseball players was always a high percentage, and then it wasn't.
Wasn't it black dominated in the 70s and 80s, maybe up
Without a doubt.
until the 90s?
Doc Gooden. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, you go on and on and
yeah.
on and on.
There was a shift, and I think it was a similar shift to rock music, where there was this sort of, we have this other thing over here, and these other things are more interesting, and these other things are more reflective of us, I'm assuming. I mean, that's where my brain goes.
And I'm so glad you went there, because the flip side to this coin. So I didn't get screenshots for this. I can read sections if you want, or you can just take my word for it. There are two recent Jimi Hendrix reviews on Pitchfork, and they both just completely pander to this like this disgusting, perverse, almost like sexual need to find racial grievance everywhere, and to try to paint Jimi Hendrix as a figure who is unjustly marginalized. And maybe it's a generational thing because I'm 52, but I'm sorry, Jimi Hendrix is not fucking marginalized.
Yeah. No.
And
How? What's the
okay,
argument?
so I apologize for not having these open right in front. I can here we go. So this is recent. This is from 2020. This will say, oh, this is from June 1st, 2025. This is a retrospective review of the first Jimi Hendrix Experience album, Are You Experienced? Oh man, dude. This is gross. So it talks about how some gig at the Hollywood Bowl he played. I believe he was opening for the Mamas and the Papas. This is by a writer of very high repute named Grayson Curran. And so He's opening for the Mamas and the Papas at the Hollywood Bowl. He doesn't want to be there, and according to Curran's account, the Jimi Hendrix thinks the gig isn't going well because the response is kind of muted from the audience. Okay, so it was the summer of love, sure, but it was also the long, hot summer with ubiquitous race riots providing a warped mirror of the overseas escalation in Vietnam. The moment was charged, and so this lily white crowd was having none of the black man in his butter yellow pants and bejeweled jacket, even if he was letting them off easy. And that, okay, go ahead. You made a face. I'm going to leave. I want to hear your take on that to start with. I'll get back to my other point.
Are you sure?
Yeah, man, because I feel the same way as you when I fucking read that. This is perverse. And that's why I say it's almost like a sexual. It's almost like somebody putting on blackface as a claiming that they're doing it to do a parody of somebody doing blackface. In other words, it's so salacious and it's savoring of all the, oh my God, these lily white people in the crowd for the Mamas and the Papas, they saw a black man. And really what you're doing is you're betraying your own fucking prejudice, because that 1960s crowd was not looking at Jimi Hendrix as just a black man the way you are projecting all this shit onto that. Like it's like we've become narrower in our scope, and my supposed peers, music journalists, are like the fucking frontline paratroopers of spreading this shit. And so there's that. And to your point, I'm really glad you brought up the baseball thing. So just as a quick setup, I've said this ad nauseum. I say this all the time, but it's important for context. I grew up in the South Bronx in a mostly black and Hispanic neighborhood, but my friends, most of my friends were older Puerto Rican kids, about 6 years older than me, who were aware of hip hop and Latin music, but were into exploring a ton of other stuff. So I discovered rock on my own at like 8 years old. But when I moved to this block where these other older kids, we were trading a bunch of stuff. And again, we were aware of hip hop. We were there. This is the 70s, early 80s, right? But a lot of my older Puerto Rican friends basically were into rock music, and then sort of tangentially into hip hop. There was one hip hop freak among us, but he also loved Rush and like, UB40 and U2 and shit like that, Van Halen. And then I went to a private school in Manhattan, a very exclusive private school with mostly white kids. A lot of those kids were into rap music. So and that's oversimplifying it somewhat. A lot of those kids were into punk and metal too. But there was I was hearing hip hop more at my exclusive private school than I was at home. Right. And so my sense of the whole racial picture is not as fucking just, dumbed down as what these writers are trying to present to us. To me, there was a real fertile exchange of music going on all around. And what I noticed was, you can say bands like Living Color and Fishbone, oh, it's racism that had something to do with them not being as successful. I don't know if that's played a part. Maybe it did. But Fishbone, for one, were so varied and all over the map, and you could go to a Fishbone show and they play like 12 different styles of music, that they weren't going to have everybody on. They weren't going to catch a big mass crowd with that, right? Awesome, amazing live band, actually one of the best I've ever seen. But what I noticed is the kids that I was growing up around, other than the kids I mentioned who were really exploring music, all the other kids around us were in lockstep with like whatever's popular on the radio, and they were into like sort of prototypical hip hop, what was then called freestyle, house music, anything that was being fed to them, they were into. None of those kids wanted to touch rock music. They wouldn't have heard of a band like Funkadelic. They wouldn't touch that stuff. In fact, they wouldn't have even gone as far back a previous decade to classic R&B unless it was being sampled hip
Hmm.
hop track, and fuck jazz for these kids. There's
Right.
no way in hell. And before a Tribe Called Quest, none of them would have. They would have been like, "What?" They'd have made a
Even
face.
after. I mean, I think as big as Tribe did get, it was not Tupac. It wasn't Biggie. It wasn't. It
Okay,
wasn't your top.
totally.
And Tribe has always sort of been that middle class rapper in a weird
Mm.
way. Like they were never. They had Q-Tip. Like it's sort of they were never tippy top stars. And when it comes to rap's tippy top stars, there has always been a large contingent of white consumers of tippy top
Oh,
rap stars.
Ice-T in the early '90s, late '80s, early '90s said, "If any." Now this is a completely different landscape in the late '80s, early '90s, but he said, "Any rapper that goes platinum, it's mostly due to a white suburban kids buying their shit." And I think he was absolutely right. You could see it at the shows, right? Like rap shows, a lot of times there's a lot of white people there. Uh, um, Depending on where, and if it got to a certain level, like arena sized shows, right? I
You
think,
have to.
yeah. I mean, I
I
think
mean,
Tribe.
we're what? At this point, we're 11, 12% of the population, black people. Like, I think at the height, it was like 15, maybe 16, something like that. You can check that if you want, but we've never been a majority of the population in this country. If you're going to sell out arenas, you're going to have a bunch of white people. You're going to have some Hispanic people. You're going to have people of different races. Go ahead.
And I mean, yes, you can. I like your point about Tribe never being like sort of the top dogs. They were sort of like I don't know. I don't want to say an elite, a gourmet taste.
Yes, I think that's actually perfect.
Okay, I don't agree with that, but yes, I like your point. Even though I look at it slightly differently, I think they did have some like sort of on the ground uh penetration. They
Sure.
did, just like De La Soul did, right? But De La Soul are from the suburbs of Long Island. They're not even right.
I
They
would
didn't
put
they
them
didn't
in
try
a
to
very
hide it.
similar category.
Right. They didn't try to hide that either. But my
Honestly, I'd
point.
put the Roots in the same category.
Okay.
Like
Okay.
where you're talking, maybe it's not middle class, maybe it's upper middle class.
Mm,
But it's sort of Common is another guy I'd throw in this. It's not that these guys didn't have hits. It's that they're not Drake, they're not Kanye,
no.
they're not in that elite class of, I mean, these guys got as big as Madonna and they were pop stars. I don't
Right.
know that
These are not pop
Common
stars. No.
or a Tribe were pop
No.
stars. I
No.
wouldn't
No.
call
No.
them
No.
that.
No. No. No.
That's what
No.
I
They're
mean.
big. They're big, even though you can't see it. They're big in this world. The music
Oh
scribes
yeah.
love those bands, and I do a lot of that stuff too. The point I was getting at was if you went to a kid that wasn't one of my older friends on my block and played them jazz music, they'd have looked at you like you had four fucking heads. And they would have looked at you even more askance from that than they would have from rock.
Hmm.
Like, because at least they had some exposure that, oh, what's that rock shit? But jazz music, if if I had played like In a Silent Way by Miles Davis for one of those kids, which I hadn't even discovered that album by that point anyway, but they'd have been like, what the fuck is this? So this conversation is overly racialized because Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers points out, and I've talked to you about this, he considers Funkadelic heavier than Black Sabbath. And I don't dispute, I wouldn't quite frame it that way, but I don't dispute what he's saying because they were a kick-ass fucking acid rock band for the first 5 records until Bootsy Collins joined. I guarantee you, if you played a Funkadelic record like Maggot Brain or something like that, maybe there were cats in the 70s, black kids listening to that, but nobody other than my 6 friends, older Puerto Rican friends, would have touched that stuff. So is it that racism took rock music from black people, or did black people lose interest, kind of like what you're saying about baseball?
I think. Okay, so let me go deep into my media studies bag.
Nice.
All right. You know how you start a new social network?
No idea.
You know how social networks tend to start? How did Facebook start?
Oh, just like an exclusive, like it's like an exclusive little group of people that wants it for one purpose, and then it sort of catches on and gets out to everybody else. But that's not what they were hoping for it to be, right? It was just for Harvard kids to like check out
Yes,
freshman girls.
it was. I believe it was created for in order to get like I was in college during this time when Facebook was floating around. You had to wait for it to come to your college.
Mm.
It was niagara.facebook.com.
Oh wow! So it was it was on a local server.
No, it wasn't on local servers, but it was localized. It was
Okay.
about you being a part of your network at your school.
Okay.
And you could only connect with people at your school. This is about and as a social network goes, and that's one specific example. But let's look at TikTok. TikTok was Musically, and eventually it was rebranded into TikTok.
Okay.
Once again, appeal to a very young audience who remixed music, a lot of lip syncing, a lot of playing, but it's a small core audience.
I was going to say it's initially a niche audience, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then it sort of takes over the world. You can't start broad and take over the world. Not with a social network, and I don't think with a music genre either. It starts, or a subgenre, I would say. So I think what happened was there was the birth of this hip hop rap idea. And this idea was owned. And I mean owned. And some people still talk this way. It's crazy now.
A lot of people talk this, not just some people.
Yeah, but we're talking, if you're talking 70s, you're talking 80s even, really up to Run DMC, it was pretty exclusive.
Right.
You would get Latin people and you get black people.
And even that has been hotly debated recently.
Yeah. Well, but there were Latin dudes from the start, if I remember correctly.
There were, but
Puerto Rican guys, I believe.
Yes, but the Lord Jamar argument is that they didn't.
Well, fuck Lord Jamar.
Hey, that's James talking, not me.
Yeah, fuck Lord Jamar. Fuck Lord Jamar. I mean, like, dude, you're wrong here. Puerto Rican dudes were involved from the start. I mean,
he doesn't say they weren't involved. He says they didn't really have a hand in creating. He's like, his point, which I'm neutral on.
Yeah.
His point, because I don't think it's as outlandish of a point as sometimes you might think, because he puts a spin on things and makes it super provocative.
Yeah.
But
as a talk show host should.
His argument is that black hip hop is, the architects of hip hop are black, and hip hop is a black art form that Puerto Ricans were involved in. They were coming over to black street culture. Now, Melly Mel, a lot of people who were there, that's what I'm saying. This is hotly disputed because there's a lot of people giving different, and there's some black rappers saying, no, actually that's wrong. The Puerto Ricans were there from the start.
Oh,
I think it's it's a soup, and this is very much on everything we're saying here.
Yeah.
Like, so I think it's a really fertile. There should be a panel debate on this. I would love to see that kind of thing.
I would love to see it too.
I would want to try to put one together and just be the
that'd
moderator.
be great. And I'd say Puerto Rican people and Jewish people nearly from the jump.
Well, you got to get Necro on here to talk about how because Necro, who's a white Jewish rapper from the projects and a conservative right wing, he doesn't like lefty
Wow.
Jews. He doesn't like lefty Jews, and
Interesting.
lefty. He says lefty Jews don't like him.
Necro is his name.
Yeah, death, and he's a death rap guy. He
Okay.
combined like death metal, like gore stuff with rap. That's his
Ah,
whole thing.
unique.
He says, well, if we're going to say hip hop is black, then what about the person who invented the sampler? Wasn't that person white or maybe Asian? Like, why can't they have a claim to it too? Which I think is a fair question.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to start getting proprietary appropriation, proprietary on
Mm-hmm.
this is mine, this is mine, this is mine, right? If you're going to, because there is very much still, I think, in the church of hip hop, as you have called it,
Mm-hmm.
you must pay fealty to the fact that this is a black, that you are, as Jamar put it, a guest in the house of hip hop, and you don't see it that way. But that's, I think, a lot of people who uphold this kind of code want to lord that over anybody else who likes this music, and they want you to be self-conscious all the time that even though if you love this music and it might speak to your soul on a musical level, you still can't claim it as yours.
I think it actually connects nicely to sort of the hyper liberalism, nerfing the world stuff from earlier. There's sort of this sense that you must pass this litmus test to be a part of this thing. And if you look throughout the history of mankind, I mean, that's how most religions started. That's how most cultures started. You are passing a litmus test by you. The reason why I think I don't think Judaism is the other one. I think Islam and a lot of other religions. The reason why in cults throughout the years, and I'm not saying all religions are cults. It's a different conversation, but most cultures, the reason why people wore specific things or didn't wear specific things or ate certain things and didn't eat other things, it was to keep the ideas, the culture, the cult, the community unique. It was a form of identification.
And signaling to other people that you are a member, or to other adherents if it was more secret. But being out in the world and wearing something, you're signaling to everybody else you're part of this tribe.
Mm-hmm.
And music definitely follows that, and I find that very exhausting and intolerable to me. And that aspect of hip hop, which also exists in hardcore punk,
Mm-hmm.
of constantly reminding you, are you really real about this? Are you a real one? Are you down with this? You know, I can't hang with that. It's like I'm not joining the fucking army or a church. I don't want to be always made to feel like I have to qualify just for sound. And what's interesting about this is music to me always cross pollinates and crosses and gets shared and exchanged between people, much like spices do. But I don't know if people fought over spices over the right to control the economics. But did people go, oh no, you can't use that spice in your food because we're Chinese and this is our shit, right? I don't think that's ever been. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe that does exist, but I don't feel like it's as hot of an issue. But for some reason, music, even though music speaks to you on a nonverbal level, you could be somewhere on totally opposite side of the earth, not have any cultural connection or any connection to the culture that music came from, and you could be like, wow, this really speaks to me, and you're allowed to do that. But then there's all this other stuff going on that, no, this belongs to me kind of a thing.
And I think that belonging is sort of it feels good. It feels like you're part of something exclusive, part of a club. a part of something larger than yourself, and you are. And I think it's that belonging that I love that word. I hadn't really thought about it in this way until these moments.
And it's two-edged in this sense, because this belongs to me and I
Mhm.
belong
To
with these other people
precisely,
who
and I
also
think that's what
own this
happened
thing.
post Hendrix. All right, so like, okay, so Hendrix dies in the 70s. He's part of 27 Club. You have stars. Dobie Gray comes to mind immediately. Like who are doing kind of like, it's rockish, but it's not. Not no one immediately takes the throne. And then you have the birth of this thing, and this thing is ours. It's and whether right or wrong, and look, I think both things that we've said are great arguments, but these people feel like it belongs to me, and I belong a part of it.
Who, long-haired suburban white kids? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm talking about black kids
Oh, 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 oh.
with the origins of hip hop,
Oh, yes,
and
yes, okay.
and people in the mid '70s as this sort of these the famous rec room in the basement of the projects in the
Sedgwick Avenue.
Bronx,
Yep, yep, yeah.
and you feel like you're part on the ground floor of something. Hence, that's why I bought the Social Network piece.
Hmm.
Like you're on the ground floor. Like I'll probably never delete my Facebook account. Like because it's sort of it's something I've been a part of now for a long time. No, well, it's my second account, I think, but doesn't. Yeah. I think I deleted the Niagara one. No, I think I lost a password for the Niagara one, if I remember correctly.
Man, that would be so interesting to go back and check that out.
Oh man, and I just haven't. Yeah, I lost the password, so I couldn't log back in. I ended up creating another one.
Doing like archaeology on yourself,
Yeah, that
online
would be
archaeology.
fascinating, right?
It would totally would.
So you have this thing where you are. Okay, yeah, I'm back on track. So where this in this dirge where there is nobody who looks like you, who's really like at the top of the charts, and something new comes out and it's taking elements from a bunch of other things that are black and blackish. And I think that's where you see this sort of groundswell. I think you also sort of saw this sort of this ascendancy of it in terms of reaching other parts of the culture. Now, we could go on deep down that rabbit hole, but before we do, I actually want to talk about the other half of that.
Well, can you hold that thought, because I want to
Go ahead.
make one point about what you said about things starting off um, in small little exclusive spaces. If I don't know if I paraphrased you correctly, but niche. I listened to an interview with the cyberpunk author, seen as the father of the cyberpunk genre. And he actually gave us the term cyberspace, William Gibson. This interview from 2020, and he said counterculture happens in the backwaters, and he said, "I'm afraid we don't have any more backwaters." And the director Doug Prey of the movie Hype, the Seattle grunge documentary, he still insists, and he also had a hand in the Dr. Dre, Jimmy Iovine documentary. I believe it was on HBO Max, if I'm not mistaken. He said that he thinks grunge is the last music scene that we'll ever have, because the internet flattened everything. Anyway, I just thought that those are interesting.
Man, that's so I don't want to lose track, but that's so interesting. I agree and disagree. I think it actually gets to the hip hop question, right? Where all hip hop today really sounds like hip hop. Like there's the Southern hip hop isn't really Southern hip hop anymore. There used to be the Atlanta sound.
Right.
There used to be a New York sound, and there's still beats that feel like they're regional. Where famously in the last year, not like us. That's a very West Coast beat.
But it was self-consciously designed to sound like that. Didn't organically just emerge out of a scene
Correct.
in a petri dish. The same is true in metal. There isn't a regionalism anymore. That I think you're absolutely right about.
Because everything we have access to the entire history of music in a way
And
that
everything
we've never had before.
right, and everything that's happening now, so that there's the cross-pollination is much faster. It doesn't have as many steps to germinate, to sit and take hold while something grows in its own little patch of dirt over here. Yeah, I mean, and the other thing to that just came to me to your point is hip hop still operates on this outsider mentality as if it is still an underground art form, and as if it isn't the most popular fucking thing in the world, which it is now. I mean, it's the dominant music all over the earth. it's and so in
Not
terms
sure
of
that's true.
its cultural presence,
Okay, I'll give you that.
anywhere you go, you're going to find that it has gotten itself into, it's seeped into the sort of language of culture anywhere, and yet people are still copping like it's like you kind of have to be in this exclusive club. They still have the mentality you're talking about, as if society doesn't want us, kind of a thing.
And that's crazy.
Totally, it's a lie, actually.
Without a doubt.
It's like either they're bullshitting us or they're bullshitting themselves.
Yeah, it's certainly denial. And it's certainly it's a religiosity. And it's thinking that my God and my my garments and my communion and my prayers, are uniquely mine. It's that belonging thing again. And there certainly was this sort of latched on, and is that, as you said, latched on belief that hip hop is something that is beyond beyond the music industry, even though it's clearly a product of the music industry. There's also obviously, and I think you astutely pointed to the sort of larger cultural like impact of hip hop, like the idea, like even the term beef, it is omnipresent, and it's not just black people using the term. It's everybody uses the term.
So many terms, almost all American slang for the last 40 years flows from this one source, and or so much of it, right? And it just becomes like white people walking around like suburban moms, like saying these things because they're hearing it from their kids.
Yeah. Well, all right. So like,
So funny.
For those of you who don't know, I'm 41, and you think of my high school, my group, we're most of the young parents at this point, sadly, because that's a whole other conversation that I'd love to have. I do this in short form. I want to do a long form conversation on sort of the state of American families and procreation in the world at some point. Not right now.
It's not a small topic.
Yeah, but it's one I'm fascinated about it, and
Sure.
I get emails about why do I keep writing about the population, Like, why do you keep talking about the population? Well, it's
Like,
because,
what else is more important?
well, to digress, keep going down this. I live in a neighborhood in Rochester. It's called the 19th Ward. I grew up not far from here. When I walked around these streets after school, there were litters and litters of kids just wandering
Mhm.
these streets.
Roaming the streets, yes.
And
Now this is like
today,
a cricket. Like you don't even hear. It's like a ghost town in that neighborhood.
there's a few kids who go outside and play. They play basketball, and it's so weird for me to be the old man driving down the street and having them like part the ways like I used to
Mhm,
long, long ago.
mhm.
But it's not litters. There's a few kids on these streets. So what? And when these are choices that we make by not not having families, by having smaller families. There's consequences to this when a society decides these things, and we're only beginning to see the consequences of them.
Right, the cascading effects of it. No, I don't really think there's anything more important to talk
Yeah,
about. I mean, it's kind of like if somebody said, "Well, James, why do you talk about breathing so much?" It's like, well, you know, it's right. Like the how we are having children or not, it really is how we're not having children,
right.
and everything else that we're these other ripples we're feeling from that is huge. I mean, you could do a whole series on this.
Yeah, and it's all things I have in the hopper.
Sure.
I want to do more, but to get to my point is that the 30-ish, 40-ish American, whether no matter what your race, if you grew up in this country, you were bathed in hip hop vernacular.
Totally. The all kids from who
It's
grew up in
there's
your time
no
period.
there's no boundary,
Right.
and um, and depending where and of course, there's some country, there's a lot of pop, um, and some rock, but there was a shift that happened that I'm still kind of grappling with. It's a conversation we've had a couple times in different ways. I think mostly off. Is that there just has not been that really, speaking to you the point about, grunge, there hasn't really been the American group that took the baton and moved it forward. Um, I think hip hop is actually at a point where rock was then,
Mm.
where okay, there was this big explosion. Yeah, there's all this creativity and all this interestingness, and then where is it now?
Hmm. Good
And your
question.
top acts now in hip hop are, I mean, Drake is known for, basically being in a room with somebody for a couple hours and then coming out talking like him and stealing,
Stealing his stuff.
dubstep and dance hall and reggaeton and trying to bring in all these things, which is cool. But hip hop as a genre itself, the well seems drying. It seems like we're fracking, and it seems like
Ooh.
and and like it seems like with rock, we fracked and the well went dry.
Oh my God, we're in like I don't know, whatever you get to when you get past the lowest level of fracking, when you go to some other dimension or something like H.G. Wells, like I don't know,
Sure.
because well, in terms of so in terms of the mainstream sort of mass appeal stuff, I would say yes. There's a lot of sort of self cannibalizing in both of these forms. Like they are just reaching back and redigesting their existing vocabulary and just drawing from that, almost like both forms of music mainstream wise are just almost like undead. They're like zombified.
Hmm.
And yeah, it's it's like Cypress Hill just did recently, like last year, in 2024, a Tiny Desk NPR concert, and they just did something with a symphony orchestra too,
Yeah.
which I'm all about. I mean, Sir Mix-a-Lot did something
Yeah.
with a symphony orchestra in the 90s. I mean, I'm all about that. That shit is cool. But it's like, well, okay, are we really gonna keep this facade going that this is like super underground stuff? I mean, this, like you're saying, if you were growing up in the 90s or even in your 20s in the 90s like I was, you're just perfectly put, you're bathed in the vernacular of hip hop. So then these motherfuckers come along
Mm-hmm.
and start to redefine our sense of boundaries around music in this really pure, like, oh well, that's I am. And it's like, why? What is the point of that? And if we tie this back to Jonathan Haidt, why have we become a Puritan, or why are we why have we become a Puritan culture with respect to music, or why are our Puritan roots just exploding on our faces like an acne problem over music in this way? Because I think the Puritanism has always been there in American culture, just ticking away, right? This is just another expression of it. But where is this coming from? Even to the point where, like, now, how many years into Fat Joe's career? How many years into Fat Joe's career is he only now being taken to task because he says nigga?
Mm-hmm.
And now, it was a big thing, maybe about a month ago or something, like, and it's like, all right, what are we doing here? Why are we combing through? And to that end, if we're going to disparage whiteness as much as the people in my line of work love to do, they love doing that, and we're going to fetishize and exalt blackness in this way that I think is really destructive. I mean, we're overlooking the fact that, sorry, once you get into the mid 70s, rock is white, and it's wanted. Like, it's not wanted where I grew up, other than from a few people who are just exceptions. It's not even like we don't have access to this music because of racism. We don't fucking want that music. Like, you were probably an exception in your neighborhood listening to rock.
Without a doubt. Like, yeah, I was, and my brother was. There was a lot of gospel, a little bit of jazz, not much.
Very little, I'm sure.
Tons of hip hop, a little bit of pop. You're very big, top end, like you heard the Spice Girls everywhere. Like it was like there's no, you heard of bop.
Yeah.
But it was not, bop was sort of, on the outside, and just, in my neighborhood.
That's awesome. That's so funny. That's so funny. I mean,
It's fascinating. I mean, because some of us, most people don't know. Like, I grew up in a housing project most of my childhood, and and I remember walking through and hearing "Wannabe," and, like, I don't know, was it 96, 97? I'm walking through the courtyard to the house from the basketball courts, and I'm hearing "Wannabe," and I'm like, that's different.
wow.
There are just some stuff that crosses over, and
Sure.
there was always a song or two or maybe three a year that did. And "Wannabe" was certainly one of them.
Did you play basketball?
Poorly,
Okay, but you still tried.
of course.
Okay.
I'm a black man; it's a requirement.
How much shit did you get for not being very good at it?
A lot.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. That's what I thought. I remember somebody, this guy, who friend of mine from college, or when I was in college, he played guitar, He's like, "You're from the Bronx and you don't play basketball?" I was like, "Yes, I don't play basketball." But see, what did your brother turn you on to? What groups was he rocking? What rock music was he into?
He loved Buddy Holly.
Oh, okay. Whoa.
Yeah, he loved Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Okay.
He loved BB King. He was the first person to play the Wallflowers for me. He had their first album before they blew.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
So he was sort of he loved he didn't love 80s rock so much. He loved Dylan. He loved where I'm trying to think of the other one. They died in a plane crash.
They
Yeah.
Leonard Skinner? No, that's not what you're talking about.
No, he loved Skinner too.
Okay.
And
okay.
I've come to love Skinner as
I
I've
do
gotten
too.
older. It's just like there's something that's infectious about them. But they're not who I mean. Allman
Ray
Brothers
Vaughan-
was on his list.
Okay.
But his go-to was Jimmy. And
Okay.
Jimmy and Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Okay. Right, because Stevie Ray Vaughan loved Jimi Hendrix to death.
Yeah.
Stevie Ray Vaughan died in a helicopter crash. I don't know
Okay.
if that's so. And then Buddy Holly died in a plane crash.
Maybe I'm confusing. I might be.
You may be, or there might be another one that I don't know of. Who, and then Skinner.
Elvis Costello was on his list too. He was a big Elvis Costello dude. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so that's similar to my brother. Definitely was not into rock music, but these older guys were like older brothers to me, and I had already found this stuff on my own, and then they introduced me to other stuff. And I mean, I always tell this story. The same guy that introduced me to Jimi Hendrix also introduced me to the Sex Pistols, to Eddie Palmieri, the Latin percussion player, and Max Roach, the jazz drummer.
Cool.
The same guy. And that guy also introduced me to Rush and Motley Crue.
Wow.
So that's just gives you a sense of where we were. Another, like his best friend on my block, they're at the same age. That dude introduced me to Depeche Mode, Steely Dan, brought Public Enemy to our block. It was the first one to rock a Public Enemy album, and introduced me to Straight Outta Compton.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. That's a mix.
And almost all of us loved the shit out of Rush.
Yeah. Well, it's when I think of Rush, I think giant. You know what I mean? I think stadium. I think big, overwhelming, immersive sound.
Not so much stadiums here, but they were an arena rock act that was on the radio. By the time I was, you get to 1984, I'm 11 or going on 12.
Yeah.
And when 84, 85 is when my friend Wilson Rodriguez, I've mentioned him many times in other places because I was standing in the doorway of my mother's the apartment I grew up in, and he was there with his Walkman, and he put the headphones on my head and played me Tom Sawyer. And because I was like super into Van Halen, which I still am. And he was like, okay, that's great. He liked Van Halen too. He's like, but just listen to this. I will never forget that moment in my life. Like literally put headphones on my head, press play, and instantly I was like, oh shit. You
had a literal Garden State moment.
Yes, if you must put it in the and I don't like that fucking I love you man shit either. I hate that stuff. I'm really uptight about shit like that. Can't stand I love you man and all that nonsense. But yes, for all intents and purposes, yes.
This moment changed Saby's life.
Pretty much. I mean, I'm super into that band, and not just that moment, but just like I said, he had me in his room, press play on Jimi Hendrix, and played Purple Haze. I had never heard it before. I was in high school. Again, he did the same thing with Max Roach. I didn't fucking know jazz from, ass from my elbow, like at all. Like I wouldn't have known what that was even, or what, how to even, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
Um, and that's super, super important. I don't know if we have that so much even anymore with, I'm sure we have kids trading playlists.
Sure.
That's great. That's fine, you know, but do we have like just, oh, my friend is really into this and hipped me to something? You know, I don't
I,
know. I'm not that age, so I don't know how much that's a thing.
I think you have my friend uses this background music for their Instagram reel or
Yeah.
TikTok, and they keep using it. And I've discovered lots of music that way, and I imagine kids are doing that as well.
And that's great, but there's something about trading. Another friend of mine, another older Puerto Rican kid named Danny, turned me on to fucking Blue Oyster Cult. There's like
Oh,
the
nice.
like there was no, and even, there weren't many of us who got into them in that same group. I did. But that's a really like obscure, not that they were obscure, but like it wasn't congruent with everything
Yeah.
else around us, And I feel very, 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 very extremely lucky, even blessed to have landed in that kind of peer group musically, where I was already on that anyway, but just being omnivorous was the standard gear, because everybody else around us, like I said, we were on an island with that. You could tell everybody, just whatever song was fucking on the radio that summer, that's what kids were rocking. And and then after a while I started buying a bunch of rap stuff too, and after a certain point, it just got to such a critical mass you couldn't escape it, and nor would you have wanted to. Um, but I think there was a sense among most of my friends that, like, well, that's sort of what's expected. We want to go find our own fucking plant our own flag. And it wasn't, we weren't even rallying so much around being a little tribe or anything like that. And you talked about that wanting to belong. I cannot fucking stand that. Like, I'm a huge metalhead for life, basically. Love, and I cannot stand when that is pandered to. Like, we're this worldwide like brotherhood. Shut the fuck up. Like, no, I'm not in your stupid. I mean, I most likely, if somebody loves heavy metal, there's something grounds we can relate on. But this whole idea where it's almost like this like nationality or this tribe, just dude, that drives me crazy. I'm like, fuck that shit. And so many bands talk that way, and they're like, oh, we got the bullet bill. I never looked the part. I wore a lot of t-shirts, but I never got the. You could, if I wasn't wearing a t-shirt, you couldn't look at me and go, oh, he loves that style of music, you know. And that's kind of the way I want it. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need to signal to the world that I'm a member of this group. It just feels oppressive to me to have to do that. So I guess I'm like a snob. I'm like a snob inside of a snobby, like like an already exclusive group. I'm like a snob inside that group.
Yeah. Um, and I think the people that we were describing earlier, the people who are speak to the temple of hip hop, they're essentially the snobby class. You know what I mean? Um, I think they're coming from an honest place. I think they're coming from a very real place, but they don't realize this is another tangent. But I don't know. Have you seen Landman yet?
No, never even heard of it.
Landman's a great show. Great show. Love the show. Big show. It's about Billy Bob Thornton.
Mm,
He plays this sort of this get shit done guy for an oil company, a middle class oil company in Texas, and
okay.
he is a landman. So he is handling his day to day is basically handling the problems that arise when you run an oil company. You're dealing with cartels, you're dealing with local government, you're dealing you're trying to make the next deal. You're trying to like get through the day. Love the show. Fantastic.
Sounds great.
He's great in it. John Hamm's great in it. It
sounds like a rich premise.
Yeah, very rich premise, and I really enjoyed it. I just finished the season. It's coming back later in the year. Big hit. And one of the things that really pissed off a lot of people, especially people who are anti-fossil fuels, is that Billy Bob Thornton goes off on this rant about how you can't be anti-fossil fuels, where that it's in everything. It's in anything that's not that's not like an animal fiber. Every piece of clothes you wear that's not an animal fiber, and even some that are, has fossil fuels in it. It's in on the roads, in the cars. It's the entire infrastructure. It's all fossil fuels.
Why would this piss people off though? Because the show is not asking you to get behind.
Well, they work for an oil company, and like there's a couple, part of it is Billy Bob Thornton chewing scenery, and at one point he's like ranting at a lawyer. They like there's like the problem with our oil based infrastructure is that isn't the oil itself or the byproducts or fracking coming up with an earthquake. It's the fact that we're going to run out of it before we find something to replace it.
Right, but I mean, I don't understand. I mean, I guess I do understand because people who complain about these things are very, again, they want the world nerfed for them, right? They don't even want to hear on a fictional show an
a fictional character giving their point of view.
Right,
is insulting.
Right. Wow.
Right. I come to say this to build on what you were describing, because hip hop is kind of like petroleum in that it is in everything. And it sort of, in some ways, replaced rock in that way, where everything was laced. And with it, now everything is kind of laced with hip hop. And I think that residue is sort of going away because everything's flat. So we don't have anything to replace it. There's not that next thing. I know that there's been a lot of Latin big hits in recent years, and that's sort of become something that's become, a big thing. K-pop is a little... But
even those have hip hop laced in them, in their DNA now.
Yeah, everything is becoming a big gumbo instead of being, the melting pot is becoming the reality for all of culture and media, instead of something becoming pure. It actually gets back to our I don't want to call it an argument, but our conversation the last time we did this, when we were talking about comedians and how those shows aren't purely comedy shows. Well, I don't know that you can today, because you can't purely do one genre, I don't believe, anymore. I think at a certain point, just to get back around to hip hop in this, the state of rock in the 70s into the 80s, is what happened was you had this sort of influx of, continued influx of young white kids with their versions of what it was. And the young black kids that probably would have followed the footsteps of a Hendrix, they found other places to go. And then they were these competing forces, and they lost.
So rock lost the black vote.
Rock lost more than a black vote, but it started with the black vote. It's
actually rock lost. You're saying rock lost to everybody's.
Yes,
not everybody, but it's.
I mean, they lost the country too.
They lost having the majority constituency.
Yeah, because what we've seen is sort of this country hip hop world grow, in country world grow, and rock world shrink.
Yeah. I'm good. I mean, and your baseball analogy is perfect there, because that's also what happened there.
Yeah, you had a lot of guys that would have been baseball players became basketball players
Oh,
and
definitely.
football players.
Oh, without question. Which is interesting because baseball is much less punishing on the body, certainly than football, but even than basketball is. It's not as demanding physically. It maybe is in terms of, I mean, obviously the number of games. It depends what position, obviously, you're playing. Or,
But
shortstop, you're going to
I
get
think for the
more.
most part, you're right.
But I mean, basketball, you're fucking constantly, you don't do that in baseball. So, um, and that's another thing that I've always found. And that's, not to get on this tangent, we've talked about this a lot over the last several years. I don't think the so-called, well, not the death, but the decline. I don't think the decline of baseball happened just organically. I think it was hastened along by outside factors, but that's a story for a different day. I don't think that just happened. But I mean, now you look, there's hardly any American black players.
Well, there's even fewer American players, period.
Wow.
I mean, there's still white players, yes, but there's
Yeah,
less.
there's more than black players, but they're Latin. Yeah, right. It's like
Yeah,
totally dominated by Latin players.
yeah, and
Yeah,
increasingly from Korea and Japan.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. So to
Oh,
put,
by the way, is similar stuff is happening with basketball too. That's the hilarious part.
oh yes, yeah,
Because you're seeing, I mean, Luka Doncic is obviously, if not the most famous basketball player, is one of them. You have Wemby, who's African and French, uh, and I think he's biracial as well. Um, you
I was gonna say Milo Yiannopoulos, Giannis. I was gonna say,
Giannis is the first one. If you, I believe there's a streak of the last 10 MVPs of the NBA.
have been
None of
flawed.
them are American.
Right. So that's the sort of the canary in the coal mine for basketball. Where are those kids? Where are those black kids gonna go? Back to rock
Uh,
and roll.
I think some of them became football players. I think I'm a big MMA fan. I think some of them, have ventured in that direction.
Well, why would you logistically? Okay, it's one thing if you love football, but not everybody gets into sports from a just pure love of. There's this sense, and rightly so, that to get into the NBA, you're more likely to secure the bag, or you get guaranteed contracts, et cetera, right? Why would kids start veering away from the NBA? What black kids specifically?
Popularity. It's that simple.
Okay,
Like football has been supreme
sure, of course, without question.
forever.
Like it's not even close. And I think it's so funny to watch
It's a
these
perfect
sports.
it's a perfect media game. Perfect.
How so?
It's
Why is
3
it more?
hours,
Okay,
almost 3 hours exactly. There's stops, perfect stops for
yeah,
commercial breaks.
yeah, that is true. It is all
And
stop,
how
start,
does
stop,
how
start,
do
start,
how
start.
do how do most media companies make their money? They make money off
Oh, yeah,
commercials.
yeah, yeah. No, it is perfect for that.
The NBA is sort of, and they've made it worse through their choices in terms of their having challenges at the end of games and review. It's sort of yes, it's a frenetic game. Yes, there's stops and starts, but it's not as perfectly shaped.
Mm, mm.
Also, all the games, not all, but most of the games are at one time on one day.
What's dumb?
So you had this sort of like it's actually an easy watch. There's a lot of people who've complained about how the NFL is spreading out their media rights
Oh,
through all these places.
You're saying it's a good thing that most of the games in football are on at the same
Without a
time.
doubt.
Okay.
You
I
know how much of a commitment it is to follow the NBA?
No, because I'm not that interested in it. I
It's
think
if you're following one team, you got to commit 3 days a week.
mm,
Like Major League Baseball, you got
oh
to commit
sure,
what,
5
5 days a week,
days
6 days a
week. Yeah,
week?
yeah.
Like it's if I'm a Bills nut, for those who don't know. If I want to follow the Bills, I want to watch the Bills game, and that's the bare minimum for most fans. They just watch the game. There's those us crazy people like me who listen to 80 podcasts on it and whatever.
Well, there are fans that like the sport itself in addition to their team.
Yeah.
They like their team and then the whole sport. There's a lot of fans. There are fans that just only
Well,
follow their team, but then there's fans that follow the whole thing.
well, let's start with just the base level and we'll work our way up. Base level, you support your team.
It's one game a week.
That's one game a week. That's 3 hours. That's it. You walk away. You got a result. All right. Let's say you want to watch the league. Okay. You can watch your team and another team comfortably. You got what? That's an afternoon.
Mhm.
You can walk away.
And typically on Sundays, not always anymore, but the whole appeal has been that Sunday afternoon, you either go to a bar or you
Yeah.
sit on your lazy boy and do your thing.
Sure. Or you watch, Sunday Night Football in your team, or if you just watch Sunday Night Football, like it's an easier, it's less of an investment. It's easier to follow than those other sports. It's a perfect media sport. Perfect.
It looks fantastic on TV.
Yes.
It's an awesome. I mean, I've been to one pro football game, and it's an amazing atmosphere. Like the crowd, it feels like a
Sure.
manic political rally or something. Like
Right.
almost there's like a fever pitch that is really intense. But you just can't beat the way football looks on TV. That's so awesome. You know what I love? Walking around the neighborhood in the wintertime, right after dark, and you can see the glow of people's TVs and you can see they're watching football games. It's just
Sure.
a really nice, fun, like it's just a very warm sensation I get from that during football season. But where are these black kids going to go, James? You're saying to MMA. I think they should go back to rock and roll.
Well, okay, so there, I think there's a few things. A, there's fewer of us. Just pure math. There's fewer of us. Period. B,
Keep mating if you keep mating with white people. There's going to be
well, I think that is part of the equation. Sure. I mean, if you look at, Pat Mahomes is a great example. I believe it's you and you look at a lot of both NBA and NFL players. Tons of biracial kids, and we're going to see even more in the next 10 to 20, 30 years. So I think that's part of the equation. I think and I think that there are just sort of the pool of players in these sports have internationalized, hence the NBA conversation. Therefore, I think you're just seeing that fifth guy on an NBA team that would have been black is now black, but from Nigeria, or a Korean kid, or from
Pacific
Slovenia.
Islander who played rugby or something, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
And I mean, you're seeing similar things in the NFL where it's like, okay, that 31st quarterback in the league that would have been white is black. So it's not that that quarterback totally disappears. And then you have backup quarterbacks, more and more are black. it's not that that guy disappears. Some play other positions. You know, maybe in a different era, you would have had, I don't know. I'm thinking of Julian Edelman,
Okay.
who was the wide receiver for the Patriots.
Who
He was a
played
quarterback in
quarterback in
college.
the college? Yeah, yeah.
Maybe in the 90s or the 80s, he would have been an NFL quarterback.
Because they would have given fewer spots to black quarterbacks, is what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, look, I love football more than most things, more than any human should. But look, there was a clear bias there. Very long time. Charlie Ward should have got an opportunity to play NFL football, and there's a lot of bias. Part of it's racial, and part of it is just type style of player.
Right, because the same bias existed against Steve Young.
Steve Young, Doug Flutie.
Yeah.
Like the guys who ran first was sort of like it was seen like a non thing. And most successful black quarterbacks, Tommy Frazier comes to mind. Nebraska Cornhusker national champion in the mid 90s, great college quarterback. He didn't get an NFL sniff really, you know. A white guy, Eric Crouch comes to mind too. He was also, Nebraska starting quarterback, national champion, and he got switched to safety because he ran around. There's these are becoming a bit more competitive.
Well, and I think there's even it's probably swung a little bit too much the other way, at least in terms of the media conversation, because there's a lot of parallels.
Sure.
The things I complain about in music journalism are rampant in sports journalism, maybe even more so.
Good God, Mina Kimes.
Yeah, who I was once a fan of, but then
Spain.
I think they can taste. Yes. They can taste, right, that there's a reward. It's like your salivary glands. If you're an opportunist, you know where your bread is going to be buttered. Musicians do this all the time too. They say things that they know are going to be the safe thing that gets you reward. And, these conversations over even Lamar Lamar and Josh Allen in the
it was
MVP
versus
race.
It was versus.
It's just so
disgusting. It got racial immediately.
Yeah, and and then the Caitlin Clark Angel Reese thing.
Yeah.
Where we're now being gaslit in certain cases, and then that re-injects resentment into the conversation. I think these things reignite racial animus. Not to say that it was gone, right? I don't know whether race played a part in Living Colour not having a higher career arc. I mean, they had a really big hit on the first record.
Yeah.
And then they started making more challenging music, which I loved more.
But that's sort of part of the game. Like if you choose to make more challenging music, if you choose to make a more esoteric movie, after your first, you make a big hit movie, you decide, okay, well, I'm going to make more of an art house film. If you choose to try to change the world instead of just, repeating a variation of the same recipe that worked, it's going to be harder to break through. So I would guess that with Living Colour, that was part of the equation. I don't think race was necessarily, I wouldn't say that was top of mind. I'd say that they made some choices, right or wrong, and they got some bad breaks.
I mean, I don't know if I honestly don't know, even though I love that band. And actually, that's the band I've seen the most of any band, just almost by accident. But they were on the first Lollapalooza for their second album. Three of their albums. So they did 3 albums. Then they broke up in the middle of making a 4th one. They broke up in the middle of making a record for reasons that are still to this day like sort of unknown, right? But all 3 of those albums got like a big promotional push. The third record, there's a song called "Leave It Alone" that was on MTV in '93. Like it was played a lot. It wasn't for
I,
lack of. So I don't know, and
I
I wonder if being black didn't help them a little bit too.
possibly. I don't think. I think it's too much dependent on one band. Like so. I think you. I think it's more a question of why weren't there a bunch of living colors trying to break through? Like it's sort of like okay. I think of I'll go to Kanye West. Kanye West's early music was shocking and kind of revolutionary for hip hop at the time. He basically said, this is a different shade of blackness with some of the hip hop sheen in braggadocio. But no, I am a goofy, kind of geeky producer who's not a perfect rhymer, who he whitened the door. And there are
And wasn't
people
from the
who,
streets either.
yeah, he wasn't from the streets, right?
Right.
His
Middle class.
both his parents were professors.
Right.
So like you had a bunch of people run right behind him, who were not doing exactly the same thing, but sort of like, oh, this piece of Kanye, that piece of Kanye, this piece of Kanye.
He made it okay for them. He right to not be the stereotype.
He opened the door. I think of let's go back to the grunge example. All right. Who you would say was first, let's say, but it wasn't one person who stepped through. It was Soundgarden. It was Sonic Youth. It was Nirvana. It was Pearl Jam. It was Mother Love Bone, right? Like it was all this slew of bands, Sub Pop, a whole subgenre followed.
And then the wider ring of alternative.
Yes.
All sort of, yeah.
Okay. You have Vernon Reid and you have Living Color.
And Jimmy Hazel from 24/7 Spies, also from the Bronx, the South Bronx, from a few blocks from where I went to elementary school. But but
where's the rest of them?
Right.
Because if there were a slew of them, I would think there'd be more chances for one of them to break through.
Yeah, there weren't a slew. And this goes back to my original question, which, I mean, by that point, kids in neighborhoods like mine had mostly
already made the decision.
And again, they weren't even into classic R&B either. We're like, fuck, that's old hat. Other than the way it represented itself in samples. But they were not going out and buying, Ohio Players records. Would have like thumbed their nose like, ugh, fuck that. No, right?
No Earth, Wind, and Fire?
No. I mean, I think we all heard, my mom had those records. You would have known who they were, but you weren't, unless you were a certain type of kid. But maybe like you would have gone and been like, oh, I want to go back to the, classic shit.
Sure.
Stevie Wonder wasn't getting much run from my
in the 80s. Well, in the 80s, I mean, that was sort of, a dearth period for him. Like,
well, yes, but I mean, sure, he still had hits on the radio, but you're not wrong. That's true. But I'm talking about youth. Inner city youth were not going out looking for classic Stevie Wonder records, right? And so this isn't just a racial thing, but in the process of however it shook out, kind of like how you were getting into from Hendrix onwards, when you get from Hendrix to like the mid 70s, most of the bands doing this stuff are white. And originally, the interesting thing is all the British bands, so your Led Zeppelins, your Deep Purples, your Jeff Beck, Cream, even
black people,
even Black Sabbath, right? Yeah. Like so that's not why they're called Black Sabbath, but
yeah,
but those British bands fucking loved the blues. In fact, Ian Gillan from Deep Purple, I don't know if this is true or not, but according to him, he said that British kids in that time period, the 60s, were hearing blues records by black artists that American white kids weren't hearing because radio here was segregated. So they were getting that stuff. And you can totally tell because all those bands at first just imitated the shit out of the blues, which I don't like that stuff. I don't like the Rolling Stones when they're just fucking playing blues. I don't like the first two Zeppelin records because they're just imitating Willie Dixon. When they start to do their own shit, when Zeppelin gets into like acoustic pastoral English folk, when Jethro Tull gets into, oh, we are English, this is what's in our soil, and then that mixes with blues rock, that's when I think those bands start to get super interesting. When the Stones hit on their own thing, when Black Sabbath creates heavy metal, basically stumbles on it almost by mistake, right? That's so when you get into the 70s and you get your Aerosmiths and your Cheap Tricks and your Kiss and stuff like that, I'm fine with like that's an aspect of Americana. We shouldn't forget that either, just because we're pissing on everything that's white, is what I'm saying. And we shouldn't forget the rock and roll roots either, but it turns into something different by the time you get into the 70s. And then the kids in neighborhoods like mine, other than me and my friends, don't, and you and your brother, and kids like that don't care for that stuff.
Yeah, the exception, not the rule.
Right.
So I do think there is sort of something to that segregation piece where radio was definitely segregated heavily, and I think it is sort of by nature, but that's because radio is genre based, and genres are generally they go heavy both in terms of POV and in terms of race. So but yeah, I do think that's something to like. If you think about, okay, that kid who could have been like, okay, so there's a tranche of kids who were talented at musicians who could have been Vernon Reid, right?
Mm-hmm.
In they're the early 80s, and they're listening to stuff, and they're looking around and they're like, they see all their friends listening to this other genre. It takes a lot for a kid to say, fuck all y'all, I'm going to do this over here. It's not that it doesn't happen. It's just difficult for that to happen.
Sure. It's you're signing up for some grief.
Yeah, I mean, isn't that childhood? I mean,
yeah.
I mean, and well, that's childhood especially, but that's life.
Sure. But here's my other question though. How come they didn't follow Prince? Prince rocked the shit out of a guitar. Not in the same, he wasn't exclusively rock. Prince is probably the next, he's not in the same lane as Jimi Hendrix, but in terms of being like an all-around package, he's rock, he's funk, he's R&B, he's got a little hip-hop thing, or he's very pop, he's very, right? Why weren't more kids doing that? Or are you saying they did?
I think they did.
They turned into The Weeknd?
Well, yeah, but I think, it's interesting, that era of Prince in the 80s. I mean, because I do think there is sort of a direct line, right? Or an indirect line. I guess depending on how you see it. I think he was, especially early Prince, was going out his way to become the biggest pop star in the world. He was chasing Michael.
Purple Rain era-ish.
Yeah, he and Michael were fighting for it. And I think, I'm surprised it took this long for Michael to come to mind. But look, it's that when it came to young kids being musicians, especially young black kids, in that era, you had Michael and you had Prince, and there were a wide variety of others. But when it comes to the top of the mountain, those were those two dudes. And I don't think they necessarily looked at either as rock stars, even though they both had rock
Right.
tinges.
Right. Yeah, I don't think they would have been looked at as rock stars.
So, but when it came to black music of that age, they dominated.
Hmm.
So once again, it's that calculation that I said about that young Vernon Reedish kid. You have to like, okay, why don't I think that kid is more likely to be in a backing band
Mm.
for Prince or down the line, I don't know, Luther Vandross or or any number of acts rather than say, hey, I'm going to be a rock star, a black rock star.
Right. Or turn into what's his name? Captain Kirk from The Roots, the guitar player who's fucking
Yeah.
awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
I think his name's Captain Kirk, or
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
his nickname.
It's
Yeah.
it's just it takes a level of courage that was sort of, I think, secondary. I think and it wasn't enough of them to sort of to break through the breach. And then by the time you get to the 90s, you had Tupac and you had Biggie and you had not just one tier of hip hop, you had multiple tiers of hip hop. And then hip hop became everywhere like petroleum.
Sure. And every white kid from sea to shining sea was shaking their ass to that stuff, like, and saying, and that's how you get like moms doing the slang,
Sure.
like, which is so funny to watch. You mentioned how hip hop is now, you didn't use the word stagnant, but that it's not, um, it's sort of in a stasis in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the upper tier. Not, I think there's tons of great lower
Sure.
level underground stuff and creativity fusing with other genres and all over the world, awesome. But in terms of its upper echelon, it's kind of like what they say about basketball, where the NBA, where the superstars 10 years ago are the same ones now, like LeBron, Steph Curry, and Kevin Durant. A lot of the that's sort of where we're at. And you mentioned how rock had gone through that phase before. I think it's important to look at jazz as a cautionary tale for what happens with genres, because jazz was popular music. Actually, it was similar to hip hop in that it came up in the brothels of New Orleans, even though it's this very refined combination of black, African derived music with European classical, and you get this incredible fusion of these two things. It started out in whorehouses, and the term jazz comes from jazz, which was a slang for like the smell of sex, right? So then you get to, by the time you get to like the early 70s, it's this museum music, it's very highbrow, and it has never in the US really recovered from that, other than for hip hop artists sort of reintroducing it, but it still really hasn't like caught on again. Whereas there are other parts of the world. I was told this by Tom from the Bop Shop, and I watched this when I at the jazz festival here, when I would see these bands from Scandinavia come through, and I would talk to them. They listened, it's still in like Sweden and Denmark, they listen to like indie rock, metal, jazz, pop, all mixed together. Like jazz is still a contemporary thing there. And I just think we need to look to jazz as like something that happens when when it gets so exclusive and highbrow that it's just almost like it's like an elitist art form that only a very few people like, and then the New York Times will talk about it, and there's magazines devoted, websites devoted to it, but it really isn't out there resonating. I hope we don't get to that point with rock and with hip hop, but maybe it's inevitable. Maybe everything has to go through that cycle.
I guess the cycle is the question. Like, where's the other side of the jazz cycle? Where does it go?
I don't know. I mean, crate diggers love using it it's in ambient music and it's in trip
Sure.
hop and it's still around and there's still people playing it and there's still music programs in schools. So it's not like it's gone, but where does it go? I don't know. That's an excellent question.
Um, it kind of speaks to just thinking the sports analogy, horse racing.
Was the third most popular sport in America
No, it
in
was
the
number
70s,
one
right?
at one
Oh, was it
point.
number one? Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Boxing is another
Yep.
one that
Yep.
comes to mind.
And then baseball
Yeah.
was the three top ones, and
And I don't think anyone would say they're in the top three now.
not even close.
I think baseball could argue fourth.
Well, it's above hockey,
Yeah.
baseball still. So it is the third. I think it's the third of the major big four sports, I guess.
Just think of the from a media geek perspective one more time. So baseball's up for media rights renegotiations. They were dropped by ESPN. ESPN wanted to cut their Sunday night baseball fee from 550 million to something like 300 million.
Mm-hmm. And
So,
baseball said no, thanks, fuck you, kind of.
yeah, and now they're looking for a new home.
To bid on those rights.
At the same time, the UFC is expecting to make $1 billion a year for their new home, whether it is at ESPN where it is now or elsewhere or a combination. It could be essentially just, I don't know that I would say that it has been eclipsed, but from the perspective of the media companies,
sure, where they're thinking their money, their profit. Yeah, sure.
It seems
they're
pretty
voting
clear
with their
that
dollars. Yeah, for sure. So, shout out to Professor Pete, who I bring up here all the time. He said to me recently, because I have been predicting that the NFL will precipitate its own decline faster than it will happen on its own, faster than it would have happened on its own. But I think the NFL is playing fast and loose in certain ways that I think within the next decade, it's going to be that classic thing where it happened gradually and then it happened all at once, kind of a thing, right? And my good friend Pete, he's a professor who loves sports, my favorite person besides you to talk about sports with, and he was like, for years he's been no dude, football is king, football is king, football is king. And then he reached out to me recently and he said, back when I was growing up, I never could have envisioned a world where boxing wasn't on top, where it wasn't a major sport. And he goes, I can see the writing on the wall that if football follows the same path, it could close itself off and bring about its own decline. And so, parallel to the music thing, I wonder if hip hop is kind of doing the same thing in a way to itself, since you made that comparison, by kind of keeping itself in mothballs, by insisting on, like, it has to be a certain archetype or for it to really be hip hop.
Saby, you're having a bit of a sound,
Oh, really?
like just in terms of like I was getting a little popping
Oh, sorry about that.
on that last, not plosives, but like it was like it got like a
staticky electrical explosions.
yeah.
I apologize.
So, I have some thoughts on football.
I'd love to hear them.
I think they're smarter than that, and we haven't seen much of an erosion outside of the wider erosion media wise in terms of their ratings.
Mm-hmm. They are going against the trend of wider erosion.
Yeah, they're pretty. Yeah, like they're big, like a big Sunday afternoon game at 425 can still get 35 million. Most will get in the 20s or the high teens, but Bills Chiefs this fall will probably eclipse 30 million.
Mm.
On Thanksgiving Day, they'll eclipse 30 million. And even if that comes down, and I think it probably will, just because of the way things are going media wise, I think you end up in the 20s. I think they could lose and not lose they could lose the game, but not lose the war.
But I mean, these things are inevitable, right? I mean, I think what my friend
Yeah.
was saying is we can't picture a world now where football isn't so dominant, but it's
Sure.
ultimately going to happen.
Yeah, and I kind of look at it the way I look at politics right now,
Mm.
where it's like it's hard to see around Donald Trump, right?
Mhm.
Donald Trump is like omnipresent. He's like came back into power and he just like seized everything, and he's just like it's everything is like through Trump world and Trump logic. But I think, of course, there's going to be a world post Trump, and yes, at some point the Democrats will take control. I do think they will. I don't think it's going to be a dictatorship like some people think. I don't see that. But here's the trouble that they have, and I think that's the trouble with sports, and I think music as well right now. You need to have someone who's ready to take that position. If you don't have someone who's taking, or a genre or a sport that's ready to take over, that the public is ready to like embrace, then we're just going to end up with inertia.
Mm.
In
So-
politics, it happens easier because what happens is the public gets tired of one party, and the party ends up the other party ends up in the wilderness, and then they finally find a charismatic person or an idea that they get behind, and voila, Barack Obama,
Right.
or voila, Ronald Reagan, or voila, Donald Trump.
Sure. They depend on each other to kind of have those trade off between that person being in the other party, they're almost in a dance, right? Where like they're like, okay, now you get that person, now we get that person. They operate as if they want to have that person all the time, but I think
It's a monopoly.
The rhythm, yeah.
I think in music and in sports, it's less of a monopoly. It's less of it's a duopoly in politics. It's more of a monopoly. Where like I think at some point hip hop will be subjugated and shoved into the background. Like it's just going to happen. Like just like rock is right now is subjugated and it's shoved in the background. And there will be a thing that follows. What the thing is, I have no idea.
I was going to say, what is the thing? Because hip hop is 40 years old. It's 50 years old. Sorry, 50.
Yeah. Yeah.
I always think of gangster rap being almost 40 years old. Hip hop is 50 years old.
Yeah. Like I don't know what the thing is, but it is a thing that I believe will happen because that's the way these goes. Now the one argument against that is sort of what I made earlier. This is the first time in history that all of recorded music is available to everybody. And like we talked about earlier, there's no regional sound that getting, a grunge sound, is unlikely. That's localized and regional. But what could happen, and what I kind of expect to happen, like I was explained by a YouTuber I was listening to a couple of nights ago. His name is Rudder Lynch, Walt the Alt Hist. And he was talking about how sort of red pill dating culture has bled into politics and bled into sort of like the conservative sort of understanding of the world now, and how he didn't think it was entirely negative. He said there are some negative elements of it, but it was like it starts in this trivial part of the discourse, and then it shifts and elements of it morph into hard parts of the anatomy of the whole.
Mm-hmm.
And you could argue that the same thing happened with the development of, Marxism, the development of socialism, the development of, go back to the French Revolution. These were just hipsters in coffee shops talking about ideas. All of a sudden, they were running the freaking country.
Yeah, sort of like the Facebook of their time.
Right?
Yeah.
So
their ideas went viral, literally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So there's possible that on some corner of the internet that you and us old people aren't aware of,
right,
that there are these kids who are synthesizing something that's probably, an amalgamation of, the history of world music. You're frozen. You're frozen, Saby.
Yeah. I'm not anymore.
Okay. That an amalgamation of the history of music, and they're cooking something up, and we won't know until it hits.
Or if we want to go Neil Howe / Kunstler, it's possible that the next thing will be a forced return to primitivism in some way, because we're going to have some sort of technological setback that will re-enable people or force people to engage on a regional level using more primitive tools, so playing with the bones of their enemies.
It's not an episode of Media Studies without the fourth turning being mentioned.
That's why I was laughing earlier, because I thought of that. But I mean, that's not off the table for sure.
Long emergency.
Right.
Shout out to Jim Kunstler and Neil Howe, future guests on the program. I agree with elements of what you're describing. I don't think that's that line. History doesn't repeat, it rhymes.
Mm-hmm.
I can see, because Howe describes that a lot in his work, where sort of the tone and tenor of music changes with generation.
Mm-hmm.
And he's gone in depth describing this. You could see where there was a shift to a blander culture to come. And I think I could see whether there is sort of like a Kunstler, like, contraction of human ability and connection and power and all that stuff. I could see a scenario where after all of this sampling, after, all this electronic driven music, we end up with, Oliver Anthony, dude with guitar, pianist.
Back in Jack White's third band.
Maybe we go back to Jack White. Maybe even though he's not a perfect example, but he's sort of like reflects something that could happen. I mean, if we look at previous first turning music, because that's what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
The next wave. 1950s music.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking boy groups. We're talking clean shit for the most part. at the same time we had blues.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you know,
Jazz was still in too, and then you had
and it was
singers
still
doing,
pretty prevalent at that point.
yeah, and you had singers doing orchestral records, and yeah.
But that orchestral, Sinatra,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the Rat Pack and Macro, you know, like, I don't know that I would say that was his apex, but it was certainly close. Um, um, you know, the origins of the Bob Hope specials, you know what I mean? So sort of that kind of different kind of monoculture and different kind of I think we end up with a digital version of that, and I'm not sure what that is quite yet.
Yeah, I don't think anybody can really say, but it's really fascinating to try and project and envision what this might be, because I've pointed this out before, but it just really strikes me. You know, you've got Taylor Swift, who's like, you know, massive. She's like Godzilla, right? Like pop stars, pop
Yeah, she
mega
just got her
mega.
masters back.
Yeah, and I just think of her appeal. She's so, I think she gives her audience a sense of safety, whereas what kids when I was growing up, younger people were craving lack of safety in their music. They wanted danger. And I wonder when something more explosive and threatening is going to come back into music, something more iconoclastic and anti-establishment, and what form that's going to take, because so much music that postures itself as anti-establishment now is all spouting the same kind of queer, LGBT, anti-fascist, anti-Trump rhetoric, and they all sound exactly the same. They sound like AI designed robots, right? They're not saying anything new. There's nothing there's nothing daring, or even, it's not even really anti-establishment at all to take that approach. It's like reading off a teleprompter, right? What is the next thing that really shakes things up and reflects people's anxieties going to be? Because I think music now is masking people's anxieties too much. But what is the thing that's really going to voice what people are really feeling? And I have no idea.
Sabby, just so that you know, the popping.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's still happening.
Yeah.
Oh, you know what? I know what it is. I'm rattling my connector cable by mistake. Sorry about that.
It happens.
All right.
I'm sure my voice is not perfect either. I'm getting a little bit of static in mine, but I'm not all that concerned. But but yeah, I think there's this really interesting fuck, I forgot the point. Go back on where were you?
Well, I was saying, you know, if you look at pop music now,
Oh,
my
go ahead.
no, my sense of it is that it gives people a sense of safety, whereas what was craved by my generation was danger.
Yeah, and so it makes me wonder if it's usually a bit of a pendulum swing. So perhaps the next wave is a little bit more dangerous.
Right. And then we would get to, I guess, the first turning music, which is a triumphant music that reinforces our sense of hegemony after getting through this crisis.
Well, assuming that we get that we're the winners.
Right. That's true. That's true.
I mean, I've been you know, I don't want to turn this into the Neil Hellcast, but I've been listening to his podcast a bunch. Demography Unplugged. It's a great Substack, really interesting. And I've listened to a number of his recent interviews. He doesn't strike me as a guy who thinks that the U.S. is going to win this.
No, he doesn't. He doesn't. Why should it? Not. I'm not celebrating that it wouldn't, but I mean, just historically speaking, it's just like music genres, right? Like your
Yeah.
dominance eventually comes to an end. There's nothing that lasts permanently. So why should we presume that we're going to be we're going to emerge as the dominant global superpower? But then I wonder if that wouldn't be reflected in our art in a really
Interesting
great,
way.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I think it would be. I mean, because it would be the next great cultural shift. It'd be the first time in, at least my lifetime, probably, yours too, where America wasn't really looking down on the rest of the world. And we were kind of like, oh, we're kind of just another nation.
And that could be
And,
our shared, the thing that unifies our art, that perspective being common to all of us.
or just, it could be this drive to get back there. This sort of like to get back to what we lost.
Hmm.
I think there's this really interesting possibility that we just don't see. There's and I would love to ask Neil this directly. Because he says he doesn't quite understand yet. At least he says it's not. It's obvious that we're headed towards some sort of crisis,
Mm-hmm.
but he doesn't seem to understand yet which direction we're going, whether it's internal or external. And he's made the argument that whether it was in the 1860s or the 1930s, if you would have asked the average American, they would have made the argument in the 1860s that it would have been an external war.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1830s, it would have been an internal war,
Mm-hmm.
and we would have been wrong. And
Mm-hmm.
there will be elements of both that would go down. And what I hadn't heard that guy ask was sort of with the outcome. What if it's a weird détente where nobody wins? Or everybody ends up sort of like, because that seems what, it fits with our larger conversation in that, like, I think that is rock white? It's rock is at the point where it doesn't exist. And I know it literally exists, but it's
I know what you
no
mean.
longer a major player. It's a minor player.
I know what you mean. Rock is like hockey now.
Yeah.
If hip hop is like bass, or if if hip hop is like baseball, rock is hockey.
What if the post-Trump world, the post-crisis world, is one where it's just it's isolationalism, or it's globalism, like pure globalism. I mean, global governance.
Mm-hmm.
What if it's either way, where it's like where it's literally we're no longer where nations are at the point where they're like, hell, we're going to be self-sufficient because we can't trust anybody, or it's going to be a world where that's entirely like no, like kind of like the Watchmen HBO show where like I think in that show's history we went to war with Vietnam, and Vietnam is now like a state. So I think we maybe, I guess I'm going on this digression because I believe that we may be looking at it the wrong way, that there may not be like a pure winner or a pure loser. It might be like a concept that dies, or an idea that dies. It seems like, whether it's capitalism or whatever,
or an entire paradigm falls away.
Yeah,
and
that kind of thing.
That would be fascinating to ask Neil Howe about. and see what he can envision outside of this model that he's proposed. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of different possibilities, or we end up in like a Cold War type of thing with BRICS and us, kind of, right? Like who knows?
I mean, that's
And
basically what happened. Like you had the combatants that won World War II end up basically in this long, Cold War.
and also, we don't know how much humanity is going to be in a state of acceleration and simultaneous resistance against like integrating AI into our, everything we do in our lives and our
Sure.
whole existence, and that some of it could come from there too. So it's going to be fascinating.
Yeah. As we wrap this up, just I want to mention another great podcast episode I saw, was I was more listening to it than saw it. It was Ross Delfett. He's
Not
got this
familiar.
interesting show. He's a
Oh.
New York Times columnist.
Yeah. I no, Ross, do that. Okay, yeah. Is that yeah, I wrote a piece responding to something he wrote. He, interestingly enough, cites 9/11 as a turning point in, I forgot the term, he's got a term for it, post mass culture, and is that it? And then he puts
I think so.
Radiohead in there too, I think.
Sure.
I might be getting my wires crossed with Stephen Hayden, because Stephen Hayden also is big on Radiohead and Kid A being its huge turning point. But yes, he's got a term for it, and 9/11 is the dividing line.
I think to put it in a how framework, it's he sees 9/11 as sort of a precursor to larger crisis, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it as sort of a quickening, where it seems like culture and it's culture and society has not. It's the apocryphal line. There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's stuff sped up in terms of world events, but it seems like and I think we've sped up even further as post 9/11. Like 9/11 broke some sort of shield, I think culturally, mentally, emotionally, I think
Of
in the
American
American mind.
invincibility, right? Of American invincibility, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's some valid points there. I'd have to think that through a little bit further. But I think there's definitely some valid ideas there.
Yeah, I don't love his framing of pop culture following that same track of 9/11. I think it's a little too convenient, but I like that he proposed it kind of as a jumping off point to think about things. Right? I'm not like married to his framing, but I appreciated it nonetheless. But I
Sure.
think on the actual in terms of the American psyche and 9/11 itself and us as a people, I think he's closer. I think he's there's definitely something there to in what he's saying.
Agreed.
So yeah, I'm familiar with him. I have to check out his podcast more, and I really have to check out Neil Powell's stuff more. I say this like every time
Sure.
I talk to you, but I gotta. I was like writing it down for a second there while I was looking away.
Oh, just on the oh yeah, I'll put the button on it as we close the Ross thing. I was listening to his sort of his last episode, and it was about AI. He was talking to this AI researcher. This guy used to work at OpenAI, and the idea was sort of how basically the thought process was that we're not going to have any choice. but to sort of integrate this into every element of our economy.
Just our lives. I think we're past the point
Well,
where
lives,
Yeah.
yes, and I think people will push away. But when it comes to like, if the idea is to this thing is going to quickly become so powerful. Some people believe, maybe it's not, but let's just assume they're right.
that's what this guy from OpenAI who worked at OpenAI
Yeah,
was saying.
and I mean, not just him, but there's a lot of people who believe this, including Elon Musk, including Sam Altman, and so many other people,
Which is
and
amazing to
including the
me.
Biden administration.
Which is so amazing to me that people still poo-poo this as if it's it's overblown.
Well, I mean, if you want, I mean, anyone who's listening to this, I mean, you can go listen to that Mark Andreessen on Rogan, which still really blows my mind about the conversations these tech billionaires had with the Biden administration, where basically it's like they didn't say this, but their actions were, we're scared of this and we're going to control this thing. Like, we're going to shut this shit down because like I don't like that approach because it's not the kind of thing that you can do that with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like if you are competing, if you're running an ice cream shop and the people across the street is running an ice cream shop and you're like, oh, we're just gonna like not use milk and sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, oh yeah, we're gonna use all the milk and sugar we want. Like, no, you're gonna lose. So you can't just say, hey, we're gonna shut down. We're not gonna innovate. We're fuck. This is and so like there's a lot of people who believe this is coming. And when I listen to David Sachs, who's the AI czar for the Trump administration, is similar, that like these things are gonna quickly become so powerful and so that we're gonna have to like integrate it into our not just our technology, not just our everyday life, but in terms of a military context. That you really and that it's going to happen in a blink. That it is exponential already.
Mm-hmm.
And that the way we all think about all this stuff, it could be just moot.
Yeah, I mean, that has occurred to me.
There's going to be a lot of problems that come with it. I mean, like this guy was pointing to like mass unemployment, and you know, I think for guys who like me work in communications, I can see that definitely hitting us hard. You as well. But I think it's it was kind of because it was very smart how they walked through it, in that it was there was a devil's advocate sort of approach to the conversation that had sort of like pulled logical strands, like why do you believe X? Mm-hmm. That doesn't really happen in these techno optimists or techno cynic conversations.
Neither one, yeah. Neither one of them has that, yeah.
And I walked away more terrified by after a balanced approach to this conversation.
Yeah, I mean, so here's what we can do our part. We can have ChatGPT on the show and just ask it questions in real time on a live stream.
Next episode, you want to do a ChatGPT episode?
Yeah,
ask it questions.
Totally, where it's the guest or one of those AI models, and
we'll do it
and see what happens.
Yeah, so this is what we'll do. All right, yeah. So we'll have an episode where we have three screens. There's you, there's me, and there's we'll plug up ChatGPT, and we'll ask the wildest shit we could come up with to it and see what it says.
Yeah, and read aloud the responses too.
Yeah,
I mean, I think would be great. So I love that idea. If we're gonna face this thing head on, we might as well do it in the spirit of I don't know, some sort of cavalier spirit. I mean, yeah, there's so much to say on this. I just find it so kind of galling that there are still people who are close to computing and tech and the sciences that just seem so smug in their certainty that no, this is overblown. And they could end up being right, but I don't see how, when what we're talking about here, like the scale and the extent, could just completely change so much on such a drastic level, right? So we'll see how it goes.
Well, here's what, to build on your point, if half of this shit's true, would
Right.
be drastic. A quarter in some cases. Like there's all this mass unemployment stuff where like, oh yeah, unemployment rate can, like, you know, we might end up with like 50% unemployment or whatever. Like we're already seeing things with self-driving cars, Waymo. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I have.
Where basically like,
We
you know,
talked about it.
self-driving taxi.
Yeah.
So, oh yeah, every Uber side hustle might be dead already. Uber, we're talking Amazon. I'm working on my shorty on this one, where Amazon is actually they're training bots to not just drive their delivery vehicles, but step out of the car and deliver the package.
And should they train them to go after porch pirates too?
Maybe we'll have our own Amazon bot that chases off porch pirates.
Or will people hack them to become a vigilante porch pirate?
Yeah, they might.
Search and destroy team.
But yeah, like this is where we are. Where first of all, these bots, the plan is to have them in the next year or so riding with drivers, and then of course they're going to end up driving, because if we got the Waymo technology already,
yeah, so I mean,
if we got Tesla technology already, that's, I mean, and that's an entire industry nuked.
Right. So I asked this before, and this is, you know, it's like you keep expanding and giving machines the opportunity to do things for people. How are people going to be able to afford to buy the things these machines are delivering? And I don't think that's ever thought through. I think when technological advances happen, it's never, the snowball effect is never really grappled with until after it the snowball starts to roll down the hill. So
the stuff that's happening here is, when it happens in society, it's usually slower.
right.
I mean,
So,
that's what happened with, you know, going from, you know, independent businesses to, you know, department stores. That's what happened with going from department stores to, you know, inside cities and towns to shopping malls, and shopping malls to go to Amazon and Walmarts of the world. So like it was a slow progression. And yes, there were, I think what's different here is that a lot of this stuff is going to just sort of happen way quicker.
yeah. And so, again, to bring Neil Howe into this, I can't imagine this won't be some source of the crisis.
Could be.
And I imagine that it's going to be potentially, he talks about internal versus external. I imagine there's going to be maybe some combination of both, and also not only internal and external, but existential too.
Sure.
So all of those three dimensions kind of compounding one another in what James Howard Kunstler so beautifully described as the converging catastrophes of the 21st century.
Sure.
So even when he wrote that, though, that was in the 90s when he came up with that term. He had no fucking inkling of this aspect of it, the AI part of it. He wasn't talking about that. He was talking about fossil fuels ending and climate change. Right? So this is we're in a whole new ball game.
Right.
And I don't want to just be a techno alarmist either. I think those conversations aren't very useful when they only focus on that side of it, or when they're very shrill. But techno optimism is just almost autistic. And and actually that's even giving autism a bad name, because I've talked to plenty of people on the spectrum who are just autistic, who have plenty of conscientiousness in the way they look at problems. There's just something so limited about that whole gee whiz, this is going to be great kind of a thing. That stuff is gross. So we'll see. But I can't wait to have ChatGPT on as a guest.
Yeah. Well, Savvy, on that note,
have a great afternoon.
Have a great afternoon.
Yeah. All right, everybody.
Be well.